The Las Vegas arena was glowing like a giant star in the desert. Bright lights flashed, banners waved, and the sound of thousands of people filled the air like a giant ocean wave. Every single seat was full, not one empty chair in sight. The mat in the middle of the arena was polished so shiny it looked like water under the spotlights. Cameras were everywhere, flashing so quickly they looked like lightning bolts going off again and again. Fans cheered so loudly their voices seemed to shake the walls. Some people held giant posters and flags with their favorite fighters' names on them. Others leaned far forward, elbows on knees, eyes wide, ready to see history happen. Everyone could feel it deep inside. This wasn't just another fight show. It was something bigger. The air itself felt alive, buzzing like electricity. It was the kind of night when people just knew something huge was about to happen. And there, in the very middle of all this noise and heat, sat one man who seemed untouched by it all. Steven Seagal. He sat in the VIP section, close enough to see the mat clearly, but far enough to be above the chaos. He wore his usual special outfit, a smooth black silk jacket with a high mandarin collar. The jacket shimmered a little under the lights. Unlike many other celebrities, he didn't have guards or a huge group of people around him. He didn't need to wave or act important. He just sat quietly, perfectly still, as if nothing around him mattered. One hand rested lightly on his knee. The other hand reached up every so often to adjust his dark glasses, which never left his face. His long ponytail, with silver streaks now running through it, hung neatly down his back. His expression never changed. He looked calm, distant, and powerful, like a mountain in the middle of a storm. Fans whispered his name. Cameras pointed at him. But Seagal didn't nod, didn't grin, didn't wave. His face stayed cool, almost like he wasn't really part of the celebration. Suddenly, the booming voice of the announcer filled the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen," he shouted, "tonight we honor the warriors who defined a generation, the men whose names are forever tied to martial arts greatness." The crowd roared. Cheers and whistles rang out, bouncing off the ceiling. Steven Seagal's mouth twitched just a little, almost a smile. When the giant camera screen showed his face, he gave the smallest of nods. It was his way of saying, "Yes, I belong here." To most of the crowd, he looked untouchable, the perfect professional, the master. But backstage, in a hallway filled with posters of legendary fighters and guarded by security, a very different scene was happening. A young reporter named Elena stood nervously, waiting. She had just finished school and had only been working as a reporter for 3 months. She couldn't believe her luck. Her editor had given her a chance to interview Steven Seagal. Remember, her editor had warned earlier that day. Seagal doesn't like foolish questions. Be respectful. Keep it about martial arts. And whatever you do, don't ask about lawsuits. Elena had nodded so quickly her head almost fell off. Now, as she held her small recorder in her hands, her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had only 5 minutes to ask her questions, and she wanted to make them count. When Seagal appeared with a small group of people, Elena stood straighter, trying to look confident. "Mr. Seagal," she said carefully, after introducing herself, "you're here tonight among so many martial arts legends. What does it mean to you to be part of this event?" Seagal took his time. He slowly moved his glasses, looked at her, and answered in a low, steady voice. "I've spent 40 years perfecting Aikido," he said. "Most of these other guys, they only learned a few kicks for the cameras. It's not the same." Elena blinked. His words weren't just confident. They dismissed the other fighters completely. "But sir," she tried again, "many world champions are here tonight. Jason Statham is expected later." Seagal almost smiled, as if enjoying himself. "Jason," he said, cutting her off. "Look, I respect what Jason did in karate tournaments back in the day. But let's be clear. He's just a movie cowboy who threw some kicks. I trained with masters in Japan, while guys like him were still learning to tie their belts." The cameraman with Elena raised his eyebrows, but kept filming. This was huge. It was the kind of quote that would catch fire everywhere. Still, Elena felt uneasy. "Would you say there's a rivalry between you and Statham?" she asked. Seagal waved his hand as if brushing away the idea. "No rivalry. I'm a 7th-degree black belt in Aikido. He did point fighting and cowboy movies. Different worlds. The words hung in the air like a sharp sword. Elena quickly ended the interview, thanking him. Seagal walked into the VIP section, his small group closing around him like a wall. Nearby, a young man had heard everything. His name was Daniel Reyes. He was an up-and-coming MMA fighter, still learning but already strong. Daniel had grown up watching Seagal's movies. To him, Seagal had always been a hero. Tonight, Daniel had hoped to meet him, maybe even learn something from the master. But hearing those words about Jason Statham made him uneasy. It didn't sound like the wisdom of a hero. It sounded proud. It sounded mean. Did you get that? Elena whispered to her cameraman as they walked back to the press area. Got it, the cameraman replied. About him calling Jason just a movie cowboy. Every word, the cameraman said. That's going viral before the main event even starts. And he was right. Within 20 minutes, the clip was everywhere. People had cut the video short, showing only the sharpest lines. They uploaded it to social media, and it spread like fire. Commentators started talking about it on the live broadcast. Fans in the crowd pulled out their phones, watching the clip, gasping, and showing it to each other. By the second exhibition match, the whole arena was buzzing. The announcer, always looking for drama, couldn't resist. Folks, he shouted into the microphone, we have martial arts royalty in the house tonight. The man who brought Aikido to Hollywood, Steven Seagal. The camera pointed to Seagal. Some clapped. Some booed. Seagal only gave a slight nod. And later tonight, the announcer continued, we welcome the 6-time world karate champion, the man who kicked his way through hundreds of bad guys without messing up his hair, Jason Statham. The crowd roared so loudly it made the arena shake. The cheer was far bigger than the one for Seagal. Daniel noticed, and he noticed something else. Seagal's hand, resting on his knee, tightened. For the first time that night, the calm mask seemed to slip just a little. Meanwhile, in the wide lobby of the arena, Jason Statham finally arrived. Unlike the others, he wasn't dressed to impress. He wore a simple button-down shirt, slacks, and comfortable shoes. He smiled easily, shaking hands and even stopping to sign a program for a security guard's son. Mr. Statham, the guard said nervously, you should know what Seagal just said about you. Jason looked up, still smiling. I've already heard, he said quietly. The guard showed him the viral clip on his phone. Jason's smile stayed, but something deep in his eyes shifted. It wasn't anger. It was something stronger. Something like determination. He patted the guard's shoulder gently and walked toward the arena floor. Inside, a karate match between two young fighters was ending. Just then, Jason Statham entered through the tunnel. Unlike Seagal's earlier entrance, Jason didn't make it a show. He didn't dress in silk. He didn't sit stiffly. He just walked slowly, calmly, with a warm smile. He shook hands with fans leaning over the rails. He nodded at the children. There was no entourage around him. Just Jason. At first, only a few people noticed. But then whispers spread. That's him. Jason's here. Section by section, the crowd turned. Phones shot up. Cameras followed his every step. By the time he reached his seat, the cheers filled the entire arena. People clapped, whistled, and shouted his name. Jason wore faded jeans and a navy shirt. His reddish beard was neat, his blue eyes warm. He looked like a man with nothing to prove. In the VIP section, Seagal sat still, but his body had stiffened. His jaw was set tight. He didn't look Jason's way, but the tension between them was sharp as a knife. The announcer, grinning ear to ear, knew he had gold. Let's hear it one more time for our young karate fighters, he shouted. The crowd clapped loudly. And speaking of legends, the announcer continued. Jason Statham has just joined us tonight. The camera zoomed in on Jason. He lifted a hand and waved modestly. The cheers nearly shook the roof. 6-time world karate champion, star of Walker, Texas Ranger, and the man who, according to the internet, can slam a revolving door. The crowd erupted in laughter and applause. Jason led, shaking his head at the silly joke. Then he sat down 3 sections away from Seagal, directly across from him. The announcer leaned in, voice full of excitement. Jason, welcome to this celebration of martial arts excellence. Steven Seagal shared some interesting thoughts about your career earlier. Care to respond? The whole arena gasped. People leaned forward, waiting. Phones lifted higher. This was the moment. Jason's smile didn't fade. He leaned toward the microphone and spoke calmly. Steven's entitled to his opinion, he said, his voice steady and kind. I'm just here to support these young fighters and to celebrate the arts we both love. The words were simple, gentle, full of respect. The crowd reacted in different ways. Some nodded, touched by his humility. Others groaned softly, hoping for a fiery comeback. But Daniel Reyes, watching closely, saw something deeper. Jason's calm words weren't weak. They were strong. And that strength, quiet and controlled, was already changing everything. The respect in people's eyes, as they looked at Statham, had grown deeper and brighter, like a candle flame turning into a torch. Seagal, meanwhile, adjusted his glasses carefully, pushing them up the bridge of his nose. He leaned close to whisper something into the ear of his assistant, who nodded quickly. Seagal's face was calm and smooth, like a still pond. But if you looked very closely, you could see his jaw tighten just a little. That small movement gave him away. The gentle words from Statham had hurt him more than if Statham had shouted in anger. The announcer, who had been stirring the crowd, noticed the tension. He decided it was safer to move on to the next part of the program. Ladies and gentlemen, he said in his cheerful, booming voice. Up next we have a wonderful demonstration of traditional Japanese swordsmanship. After that, don't go anywhere, because we'll have our main exhibition match. Everyone clapped, and the sword show began. On the mat, skilled martial artists dressed in white uniforms showed off their moves. They swung long, shiny swords with great control. The blades flashed under the arena lights, gleaming like water reflecting the sun. Daniel Reyes watched with interest, but his attention kept drifting. His eyes bounced between the martial artists with their swords and the two famous men seated nearby, Jason Statham and Steven Seagal. Daniel compared them in his mind. Seagal sat rigid, like a tall tree that refused to bend in the wind. His body was straight and still, his eyes hidden behind his dark glasses. Statham, in contrast, sat with relaxed shoulders and an open smile. He laughed softly with the fans who came up to him, shaking hands and signing programs for kids. Seagal seemed locked inside his own world. Statham seemed part of everyone's world. Excuse me. The voice startled Daniel. He looked up and saw a middle-aged woman with a press badge around her neck. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and she held a small notebook and pen. Her eyes were sharp, as if they missed nothing. You're Daniel Reyes, aren't you? The new UFC prospect, she asked with a half-smile. Daniel blinked. Yes, that's me. The woman nodded. I thought so. I'm Elena-chan. Daniel recognized the name. She was the reporter who had done a viral interview recently, the one everyone had been sharing online. I saw you watching when Seagal made those comments about Statham. Elena continued. As a fighter yourself, what do you think of all this? Daniel hesitated. He had grown up watching Seagal's movies, copying every wrist lock and throw until his training partners begged him to stop because it hurt too much. At the same time, he had read Jason Statham's books, the ones that taught about discipline, character, and respect. Finally, he spoke carefully. I think real strength shows itself in different ways. Sometimes it's in how you fight. Sometimes it's in how you don't fight. Elena tilted her head, sensing there was more. You seemed surprised by Seagal's words. Were you? Daniel looked across the arena. He saw Seagal, his childhood hero, sitting tall and serious. Then he saw Statham, smiling kindly as he bent down to sign a program for a little girl dressed in a karate uniform. I guess, Daniel said slowly, I'm learning that heroes are complicated, and that how someone carries themselves matters just as much as how they fight. Before Elena could ask another question, a loud cheer rose from the crowd. The sword demonstration had ended. The announcer strode back onto the mat, microphone in hand, his smile wide. Before our main exhibition match, he shouted, we have a very special surprise for you all. 2 of our attending legends have agreed to give us a brief demonstration of their fighting styles. The crowd went wild. People stood, clapped, and yelled. Who? Elena asked quickly, though both she and Daniel already had a strong guess. Please welcome to the mat, Steven Seagal. Seagal stood smoothly, removing his jacket to reveal a black Aikido gi underneath. He walked onto the mat with slow, deliberate steps. He gave a small bow, acknowledging the audience. Some clapped, some cheered, but others murmured with uncertainty. And joining him, Jason Statham. The cheers that followed shook the arena like thunder. Statham smiled, waved happily, and walked toward the mat. Unlike Seagal, he wasn't dressed in martial arts clothes. He wore a simple button-down shirt and slacks, but he moved with grace and balance, like a panther who had trained its whole life. Is this really happening? Daniel whispered, leaning forward in his seat, his heart racing. They're supposed to just show their styles separately, Elena answered, flipping through her press notes nervously. Seagal and Statham bowed to each other formally, from opposite sides of the mat. The announcer explained, each master will first demonstrate techniques from their discipline with their own assistants. Seagal went first. His assistant stepped forward, ready to attack. With smooth, flowing movements, Seagal demonstrated Aikido. Each time the assistant punched or grabbed, Seagal twisted, turned, and used the attacker's own force to throw him to the ground. His wrist locks were sharp, and his throws sent the assistant tumbling across the mat. The crowd watched, impressed. Aikido uses the attacker's momentum against them, Seagal said in his deep, calm voice. It is about harmony and control, not brute strength. It is about the subtle redirection of energy. His moves looked theatrical, polished, and powerful. When he finished with a final throw that slammed his assistant flat on the mat, he bowed slightly to the audience. Then it was Statham's turn. He smiled and casually removed his button-down shirt, showing a simple black t-shirt underneath. Stepping forward, he looked at the crowd warmly. Karate isn't just about punches and kicks, Statham explained. It's about discipline, respect, and perseverance. He demonstrated punching combinations, quick kicks, and sharp blocks. His movements were explosive, strong, and precise. Then he showed kata, slow, controlled forms that trained the mind as much as the body. Daniel noticed the difference right away. Both men had skill, but Seagal's moves looked like a performance. Statham's moves felt like a lesson. Seagal showed power over others. Statham showed power over himself. At the end, Statham snapped out a lightning-fast roundhouse kick that stopped just an inch from his assistant's head. The assistant didn't even flinch, trusting him completely. The crowd erupted in cheers, louder than before. Statham bowed respectfully to his helper and sent him back with a smile. The announcer jumped in. What a privilege to see two masters at work. Different styles, different philosophies, but both legends. He turned to Statham first. Jason, after seeing Steven's Aikido up close, any thoughts? Statham nodded sincerely. Impressive control and timing. Steven's mastery of leverage is something every martial artist could learn from. The crowd nodded, appreciating his generous words. The announcer turned to Seagal. And Steven, what are your thoughts on Jason's karate? A heavy silence filled the arena. Seagal adjusted his GI, eyes hidden behind his glasses. Finally, he spoke one word. Traditional. Very traditional. The way he said it made it sound like a weakness instead of praise. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Elena shook her head. He just couldn't help himself, she whispered. Statham's face stayed calm, but his eyes grew steady. He stepped forward and extended his hand. The crowd held its breath. After a pause that lasted just long enough for everyone to notice, Seagal gave a quick, cold handshake. The announcer, sensing gold, smiled wide. Since we have both legends here, how about a friendly exchange of techniques? Not a fight, just a sharing of knowledge. The crowd went wild. Some shouted, Statham, Statham. Others chanted, Seagal, Seagal. Statham spoke first. I'm always open to learning. His voice was calm and steady. Everyone turned to Seagal. He stood still, ponytail hanging straight, glasses shining under the lights. His pride was on the line. Refusing would look weak. Accepting would be risky. Aikido, he said finally, is best demonstrated, not discussed. There we have it, the announcer shouted. "After our main exhibition match, these two legends will return for a one-time-only exchange." The crowd screamed with excitement. Elena turned to Daniel, eyes wide. "This isn't just a demonstration anymore, is it?" Daniel shook his head, watching Seagal return stiffly to his seat. "No," he whispered. "It just became something else." In the VIP section, Seagal sat looking calm, but inside he was a storm. Across the arena, Statham chatted easily with fans, laughed, and signed autographs. The difference was clear. One man was fueled by ego. The other was grounded in confidence. One defended his status. The other was secure in his legacy. The main exhibition match began, but almost no one paid attention. People's eyes kept sliding toward the two legends. Seagal sat still as a statue. Statham sat relaxed, clapping politely at good moves. When the final bell rang, the fighters hugged in respect, but the applause was weak. Everyone knew the real show was still to come. The announcer grabbed the microphone. "Wasn't that a tremendous fight? But now, the moment you've all been waiting for." The arena lights dimmed, leaving the mat glowing bright. Music boomed through the speakers. Daniel shook his head. "They're turning it into a circus," he muttered. "They're turning it into ratings," Elena replied, typing furiously on her phone. "And both of them know it." The announcer's voice thundered. "Representing the art of Aikido, 7th degree black belt, action film star, and martial arts master, Steven Seagal." Seagal stepped out again, now wearing a black hakama over his GI. The long pleated skirt swayed as he walked. His face was blank as stone, his steps heavy with pride. He bowed slightly to the crowd, receiving a mix of cheers and boos. And representing traditional karate, 6-time world champion, founder of the Chun Kook Do system, and legend of tournament and screen, Jason Statham. The crowd exploded with joy. Statham appeared in a simple black GI with an old, worn belt. There were no patches or shiny decorations, just a plain cloth of a man who had trained his whole life. He smiled and waved, calm and friendly, and walked to the mat. The contrast was clear for all to see. Seagal stood rigid, dressed for the ceremony. Statham stood relaxed, dressed for practice. One prepared for performance, the other prepared for the truth. The announcer walked slowly between the two men. In his hand, he carried a microphone. The lights above shone bright, and the crowd was quiet, waiting to hear every word. "Gentlemen," the announcer said, his voice strong and full, "this is a very special moment for martial arts fans all over the world. Tonight, history is being made. Before we begin this friendly meeting, maybe each of you would like to share something about your arts." He turned first to the tall man in dark clothes, Steven Seagal. The announcer held the microphone out to him. Seagal took it carefully, like someone who had practiced this exact motion many times before. "Aikido," Seagal began. His voice was deep, slow, and serious, like a teacher speaking to a class. "Aikido is the true path of Japan's warrior tradition. Some arts focus on competitions. Some focus on fancy, showy moves to make people clap. But Aikido is different. Aikido is about real combat. It is about stopping violence, not with more violence, but with higher skill and the understanding of energy." He stopped for a moment to fix his wide hakama pants. His movements were slow and smooth, almost like a ritual. "Aikido," he continued, "is not easy. It is an art of subtlety, of hidden truths. It only shows itself to those who study very deeply. It is not for everyone, but for those who truly understand, it is the best way." The crowd listened carefully, nodding, though many did not fully understand his words. Then the microphone was passed to the other man, Jason Statham. He accepted it with a warm smile that made the crowd cheer. His energy was different from Seagal's. Where Seagal seemed heavy and serious, Statham felt open, kind, and friendly. "Martial arts changed my life," Statham said simply. His voice was gentle but clear. "It gave me discipline when I needed rules. It gave me confidence when I felt small and lost. And it showed me that real strength doesn't begin in the body. It begins with character." He looked out at the huge crowd, and instead of speaking like he was on a stage, he looked at people directly, as if he was talking to them one by one. "Every martial art has something good to teach. Statham continued. The best fighters I ever met were also the most humble. They were always students first, no matter how many championships or trophies they had won. Because the moment you think you know everything, that is the moment you stop growing. The difference between the two men was clear. Seagal had spoken about how Aikido was above other arts, and how it was superior. Statham had spoken about what martial arts gave him, and how it helped people become better. One man talked about technique. The other man talked about character. Thank you both, the announcer said, taking back the microphone. Now, we have planned something very special. Each of you will show us how your art deals with the same situations. First question, how would you handle a direct attack? If I may, Seagal suddenly cut in. His voice sliced through the arena like a knife. People turned their heads quickly to hear him. He raised his chin slightly. Simple demonstrations with friendly partners, he said, do not show the true effectiveness of Aikido. If we want to be honest with this audience, then perhaps a more authentic exchange would serve better. The crowd gasped and murmured. Elena, a young journalist sitting nearby, quickly typed on her phone, her eyes wide. Is he challenging Statham directly? She whispered to her friend Daniel, who was sitting beside her. The announcer, who secretly loved this surprising twist, tried to hide his smile. Mr. Seagal, are you suggesting something more real, more interactive between you and Mr. Statham? Seagal calmly pushed up his glasses. I am suggesting, he said slowly, that true martial arts power can only be revealed when there is pressure, not with choreography, not with cooperation. Everyone turned their eyes to Statham. The crowd was almost completely silent. Statham stood still, calm, and thoughtful. He waited a few seconds before answering, each second making the tension grow thicker. Finally, he spoke. I have always believed, Statham said, that martial arts is about controlling yourself before you try to control others. He looked Seagal directly in the eye. But I also believe in meeting challenges with respect and honesty. The crowd erupted into cheers and shouts. People jumped up, clapping loudly. The announcer almost hopped with excitement. So are we really seeing this? A challenge and an acceptance? Please, for the audience, what exactly are you both saying? Seagal stood taller. His voice was proud. A freestyle exchange. No planned moves. No choreography. Just two martial artists, reacting naturally to each other. He paused, then added with a sharp edge. Unless, of course, that is outside of someone's comfort zone. The words hung in the air like a quiet insult. The crowd oohed. Daniel, sitting in the third row, leaned forward. His heart was pounding. This was his childhood hero on stage. But now he wasn't sure how to feel. Statham nodded calmly. I accept the invitation, he said, but with two conditions. He held up one finger. First, safety must always come first. He raised another finger. Second, we keep the respect that martial arts demands. Agreed, Seagal said quickly, but something about his tone made it sound like the rules did not matter much to him. The announcer, now nearly bursting with joy, turned to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, he shouted, we are about to see something never done before. A freestyle exchange between two living legends with two very different ways of martial arts. The crowd roared with cheers. Arena staff rushed in to adjust the mats and bring safety equipment. Elena leaned toward Daniel. You are a professional fighter, she said. What do you think is about to happen? Daniel's eyes were sharp as he watched Seagal refuse the offered headgear. Statham, on the other hand, accepted him calmly and without fuss. I think, Daniel said slowly, we are about to see the difference between someone who fights to prove something and someone who has nothing to prove. On the mat, the two men faced each other. Seagal stood in a traditional Aikido stance, tall, hands stretched forward, fingers ready to grab. He looked like a wall, waiting for someone to crash into him. Statham stood in a smaller, compact karate stance. His body was calm, balanced, and centered. He looked like a tree that could not be moved by the wind. The referee, called from earlier matches, stepped between them. He quickly reminded both men of the safety rules. They both nodded. Remember, the announcer said, speaking to the audience. This is not a fight. This is an exhibition. These two men are not competing to win. They are simply showing their arts. But anyone looking closely could see the truth. Seagal's stiff body and Statham's quiet eyes told a different story. This was not just a demonstration. This was about pride, about respect, about proving what martial arts really meant. The referee stepped back. "Begin when ready," he said. His voice almost disappeared in the heavy silence. For long moments, neither man moved. They circled each other slowly, like two animals studying one another. Seagal waited, his hands out, ready to grab and redirect. Statham moved carefully, each step smooth, his balance perfect. Seagal spoke first. "In Aikido," he said loudly enough for all to hear, "we wait for the enemy to attack first." Statham nodded. "In life," he said calmly, "I have found that the people who talk the most about their skills are usually the ones who have the most to prove." The crowd gasped, then laughed, then cheered. Seagal's face turned red under the lights. The waiting ended suddenly. Seagal rushed forward with surprising speed, his hands moving in flowing Aikido patterns, trying to grab Statham's wrist. He wanted to show a controlling move, to prove Aikido's power. But Statham was not a training partner who would just let himself be caught. He slid away with tiny steps, never attacking, but never letting himself be grabbed. Seagal's face tightened with frustration. He rushed again, trying harder. Statham kept moving, slipping out of range again and again. "You must engage," Seagal barked, his voice loud. "This isn't a sparring match." Statham gave a small smile. "I'm responding to what's offered. Isn't that Aikido's own principle?" The crowd burst into laughter and cheers. The verbal jab had landed. Seagal came again, faster and rougher. This time, he managed to catch Statham's arm. For a moment, his face lit up. He started a wrist lock. This move, in training, would normally send a person off balance. But Statham didn't resist. He flowed with the hold, canceling its effect. He stayed balanced, calm, and unmoved. To the crowd, it looked like Seagal's famous move had simply failed. Daniel whispered, shocked. "He's not fighting back. He's just making Seagal's moves not work." Elena nodded quickly. Sometimes the strongest answer is making someone's best move look weak. Seagal let go, stepping back with frustration. He attacked again and again, trying to show his flowing techniques. But Statham kept slipping out, always balanced, always calm. The crowd began to notice. They started chanting, "Jason! Jason! Jason!" The chants grew louder. Seagal's jaw tightened. His next move came fast, but less controlled. He tried a shoulder lock. This was a move that always worked in movies. But Statham slipped out easily. And for the first time, Statham struck back, not with violence, but with a light open hand strike to Seagal's chest. It was gentle, controlled, respectful. But it made space, and it showed one truth. If Statham had wanted, he could have done much more. Seagal's face darkened. His movements became sharper, rougher, and less pure. His Aikido was breaking down. He was no longer flowing. He was forced. Statham stayed steady. Each time, he only did the smallest counter to protect himself. Each time, he made Seagal's attempt look weaker. Daniel shook his head, watching. "This isn't about martial arts anymore," he whispered. "It's about ego." Finally, Seagal snapped. He abandoned all pretense. He rushed forward, trying to force Statham into a painful hold. Statham saw the change. This was no longer a friendly exchange. This was dangerous. Statham made his choice. He swept Seagal's legs out from under him. In one smooth, perfect motion, he took Seagal's balance and dropped him flat on his back. Seagal lay on the mat, staring at the bright arena lights above him. The crowd exploded in cheers. The referee rushed forward, but it wasn't needed. Statham had already stepped back, calm and controlled. He even held out a hand to help Seagal up. Seagal ignored the hand. He rose slowly on his own, his body stiff, his sunglasses hiding his eyes, but his anger clear in the way his shoulders tightened. The announcer hurried to smooth things over. "Ladies and gentlemen, what an incredible exchange. Please thank both these legends tonight." The cheers thundered. but most of them were for Statham. People shouted his name again and again. Jason, Jason, Jason. Statham waved humbly. Then he turned to Seagal again, extending his hand once more. Thank you for the exchange, he said. There is always something to learn. The whole arena waited. Finally, Seagal gave a stiff handshake. Karate has its points, he muttered, before turning and walking away. The difference was clear. One man was made smaller by pride. The other was made greater by humility. The mats were cleared, but the air buzzed with energy. Cameras followed Seagal as he walked away, his ponytail swinging. His sunglasses hid his face, but his body showed his fury. Behind him, Statham stayed, waving kindly, smiling humbly. The contrast could not have been bigger. In the crowd, Daniel sat stunned. I can't believe it, he whispered. All those movies, all those demonstrations. Elena kept typing quickly on her phone. Then she looked at Daniel. Didn't you say earlier that real strength shows in different ways? Sometimes in fighting, sometimes not fighting. Well, looks like we just saw both. The announcer tried to move the event back on track. What an incredible demonstration from two legends. One more round of applause for Jason Statham. The crowd roared again, but underneath the cheers was something else, a feeling that the story wasn't finished. Seagal's walk-off didn't feel like surrender. It felt like a retreat. Daniel stood up. I need to see this through. Do you have access backstage? Elena hesitated, then showed her pressed badge. I do. Then let's go, Daniel said. This isn't just about moves anymore. Something bigger is happening. They hurried through the crowd, weaving between fans, security, and staff. Elena's badge got them past the guards. The backstage area was a maze of hallways, equipment rooms, and doors. Then, as they rounded a corner, they heard it. A loud, angry voice. From an open doorway came Seagal's shout. His usual calm tone was gone. That was completely unprofessional. His words bounced off the hard concrete walls. That wasn't an exhibition. That was a trick, a deliberate attempt to embarrass me. Daniel and Elena stopped, looked at each other, and slowly moved closer, hearts pounding. Through the half-open door, Daniel and Elena peeked into a small, brightly lit room. Inside, they saw Steven Seagal pacing back and forth, like a restless lion trapped in a cage. His wide hakama pants swished and rustled with each sharp step he took, making a sound almost like waves crashing on a beach. He turned suddenly, then turned again, moving so quickly it almost made Daniel dizzy just to watch. In the corner stood Seagal's nervous assistant, clutching a bottle of water tightly, as if it were a lifeline. His hands trembled, and sweat glistened on his forehead. He had been holding that bottle for several minutes now, but Seagal had not taken a single sip. Sir, the assistant finally whispered, his voice shaking like dry leaves in the wind. Maybe we should think about the good parts of the show tonight. Seagal stopped mid-step, whirled around, and snapped angrily. What good parts? He barked, pulling his dark sunglasses from his face so his fiery eyes glared out at the room. The assistant flinched. That wasn't real Aikido out there. Seagal continued. His voice thundered like a storm. He didn't attack properly. You cannot show Aikido if the other person refuses to attack the right way. Daniel leaned closer to the doorframe. His heart beat faster. He had never heard Steven Seagal so angry before. On TV and in movies, Seagal always seemed calm, unshakable, and cool. But right now, Daniel saw a very different man. His childhood hero looked furious, almost desperate. Elena tugged gently at Daniel's sleeve. Her big eyes warned him. We shouldn't be listening, she whispered softly, almost like a mother scolding a child. But before Daniel could pull away, another voice came from behind them, calm, steady, and strong. Sometimes, the voice said, the most important attacks aren't physical. Daniel and Elena turned quickly. Their jaws nearly dropped. Standing in the hallway, just a few feet away, was Jason Statham. He was still wearing his black GI from the match earlier, a soft towel draped around his neck. His hair was damp with sweat, and his face looked thoughtful, not proud or smug. Mr. Statham, Elena stammered, snapping back into reporter mode even though she was surprised. Her professional instincts kicked in like muscle memory. Would you comment on what just happened out there? Statham paused, thinking carefully. He rubbed his chin, then said simply, "Tonight, two different ways of martial arts met each other. That's all. Nothing more complicated than that." His voice was calm and even, like the surface of a still pond. But from inside the small room, Seagal's voice suddenly exploded again, sharp and angry. "I want a rematch right now. No silly exhibition rules, no playing for the crowd. Just real Aikido against whatever he thinks he's doing." Daniel's eyes went wide as saucers. Elena nearly dropped her recorder, fumbling with the buttons to make sure it was capturing everything. Jason Statham let out a soft sigh, the kind of sigh that sounded like he had carried this weight many times before. Then, without hesitation, he stepped past Daniel and Elena, pushed the door wide open, and walked inside. "Stephen," Statham said, his voice calm but firm, "the crowd has had enough excitement for one night." The room instantly fell silent. Seagal slowly turned around, his dark glasses once again hiding his eyes. His face looked calm, but Daniel could tell. The man's body was tense, like a tightly wound spring ready to snap. "You try to make me look foolish out there," Seagal said. Each word was heavy, as if he measured them carefully before releasing them. "No," Statham replied smoothly. "I just didn't make you look good. That is a big difference." The words hit the air like a blade cutting through cloth. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. These were two of the greatest martial arts legends he had grown up watching, and here they were, facing each other not in front of cameras, but in a small fluorescent-lit preparation room. "For 40 years, Seagal continued, his voice rising with emotion, "I have proven Aikido works. I have trained police officers. I have studied under the greatest masters. What happened tonight, that was not fair. It was not a true demonstration." Statham stood still, listening with respect. He did not interrupt. He let Seagal speak all the way through. Then he nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Stephen," Statham said quietly, "martial arts isn't about shows. It's about the truth. And the truth is, moves that work with partners who cooperate don't always work in real fights." Seagal's voice dropped low, dangerous, like thunder before a storm. "Are you saying Aikido doesn't work?" "I'm saying," Statham replied evenly, "that any martial art is only as good as the person using it. And real effectiveness is not about looking impressive. It's about getting results." Seagal stepped forward, towering over Statham with his height. He loomed like a giant shadow. "Then let's get results right now. No audience. No games." The silence that followed was heavy. The assistant shifted nervously in the corner, his face pale. Daniel looked at Statham, expecting anger, defensiveness, maybe even challenge. But instead, he saw something Daniel had not expected at all: compassion. Compassion mixed with quiet strength. "Stephen," Statham said softly, almost kindly, "what are you trying to prove? And to whom?" The question stunned Seagal. His jaw tightened. His nostrils flared. "This isn't about proving anything," he snapped. "It's about setting the record straight." "Is it?" Statham asked gently. "Because from where I stand, it looks like a man who spent his whole life on camera, making others look bad, and is now facing what it feels like to be on the other side." The words were not cruel. They were not mocking. They were simply true. And the truth struck like lightning. Seagal's face flickered with raw anger for a moment before he forced it back under control. "You don't understand Aikido," he said with sharp dismissal. "Maybe not," Statham admitted, nodding. "But I understand pride, and I've fought with pride all my life." He gestured toward the arena outside the walls. Out there, people saw two different styles of martial arts. But here, what we are really facing is something more important: how we handle being challenged. Elena's recorder caught every word. She was wide-eyed, amazed at the history happening right in front of her. But Daniel wasn't thinking about the news anymore. He felt like he was witnessing a lesson that would shape his own journey as a fighter. Seagal tugged at his hakama pants, straightening them as if to buy time. "The audience doesn't understand what they saw," he muttered. "They understand more than you think," Statham replied gently. They saw honesty versus performance, and they chose honesty. Another silence stretched across the room, heavier than before. The assistant shuffled nervously in the corner, wishing he could vanish. "If you want a private rematch," Statham said finally, "I'll agree. But first, ask yourself, what would winning actually prove?" The question hung in the air unanswered. After several long seconds, Seagal turned his back. The set of his shoulders made it clear the conversation was over. Statham accepted this gracefully. He turned, gave Daniel and Elena a small smile as he walked past, then left the room. His smile was warm, kind, acknowledging them without needing to speak. Daniel stood frozen, torn. Should he follow Statham, or should he speak to the man who had been his childhood hero? Something deep inside told him he needed closure. He needed to see the real Steven Seagal. "Mr. Seagal," Daniel said bravely, stepping into the doorway. "I'm Daniel Reyes. Your movies inspired me to start training." Seagal turned his head slightly. He gave Daniel a nod, short and distant, not quite a welcome. "I saw what happened out there," Daniel continued, surprising himself with his own boldness. "But I don't think it takes away from what Aikido teaches, how to turn negative energy into something else." For the first time since the argument began, Seagal's hard expression softened just a little. "The principles are still valid," he said, "no matter what one demonstration shows." Daniel nodded. He felt an opening, so he asked a question that came straight from his heart. "If I may ask, sir, what matters more for a fighter who wants a long career? Looking unbeatable, or continuing to learn, even when things don't go as planned?" For a moment, it seemed like Seagal might brush him off. His lips pressed together tightly. But then, something rare happened. Seagal took off his dark glasses again. His eyes were tired, weary, carrying the weight of decades of pretending to be invincible. "The second," Seagal admitted quietly, "though it took me too long to learn that." It was the most honest moment of the entire night. The words hung in the air like fragile glass. Daniel nodded slowly, feeling grateful. "Thank you," he said simply, and stepped back. Outside in the hallway, Elena waited, her recorder still running. "Did you get what you needed?" she asked curiously. Daniel thought for a long moment as they walked toward the arena. "I think," he said at last, "I got something I didn't even know I was looking for." Behind them, the two legends stayed apart. Seagal, shielded by his armor of ego. Statham, comfortable in the vulnerability of honesty. Their confrontation had moved beyond kicks and punches. It was now about the hardest fight of all, mastering oneself. The arena continued with its exhibition matches, but whispers raced through the crowd like wildfire. Bits of truth mixed with wild exaggeration. Everyone knew something big had happened backstage. 15 minutes later, Steven Seagal emerged. His face was calm again, his dark glasses hiding his eyes. He walked toward his seat, ignoring the whispers that followed. His assistant trailed behind, still carrying the untouched water bottle, looking miserable. Across the arena, Jason Statham sat among fans, smiling and explaining techniques to a young boy. He seemed relaxed, approachable, and connected. The difference between the two men could not have been clearer. Daniel and Elena returned to their seats. Elena typed furiously on her phone, her article practically writing itself. Daniel sat quietly, lost in thought. "You're going to publish everything?" he asked. Elena paused. "It's news." But even the part where he admitted he was wrong, that part wasn't sensational, but maybe it was the most important. She looked up at Daniel. "What do you think I should do?" Before Daniel could answer, the announcer's booming voice cut across the arena. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we close tonight's event, we have one final surprise performance." The crowd gasped. All eyes turned to the center mat, where organizers had gathered. "Steven Seagal has requested one more demonstration," the announcer shouted. Elena's eyes widened. "He's not giving up," she whispered. Daniel watched as Seagal rose once again, removing his jacket with a smooth motion. "No," Daniel agreed. "He's not." The announcer continued, nearly bursting with excitement. "To help, several professional martial artists will attack, so Mr. Seagal can properly show the principles of Aikido." Seagal strode to the mat with confidence. for strong men in crisp white uniforms bowed. The crowd leaned forward eagerly. "This is more like it," someone behind Daniel whispered. "Now we'll see real Aikido." Seagal began calmly, explaining Aikido's philosophy. Then, one by one, the men attacked with punches and grabs. Seagal spun, twisted, and threw each man to the mat. His movements were graceful, smooth, powerful. The audience clapped, impressed. Daniel, though, watched with careful eyes. The techniques were beautiful, but he felt something hollow. "They're attacking exactly the way he wants," he whispered to Elena. "It makes him look good." "That's the point," Elena said, still typing. "He's rewriting the story." The performance grew larger and more dramatic. Seagal's movements stretched wider, his confidence swelling as the crowd cheered. "And now," Seagal announced into the microphone, "I will show a move against an attack with full resistance. No choreography. My partner will resist me completely." The crowd buzzed with excitement. One big muscular fighter stepped forward. Seagal explained the man would grab his wrist tightly and refuse to let go. "This will prove Aikido works through technique, not strength," he proclaimed. The fighter gripped Seagal's wrist. For several tense seconds, they struggled. Then Seagal twisted sharply, and the man flew through the air, landing hard with a slap on the mat. The crowd erupted into wild cheers. Seagal stood tall, bowing with pride. But Daniel saw the truth. The fighter had jumped. It was not forced, it was performance. Just like in the movies. "Did you see that?" Daniel whispered. "See what?" Elena asked. Daniel started to explain, but suddenly, a new voice cut through the arena. "May I ask a question?" The crowd froze. Everyone turned. Jason Statham was standing, hand raised politely. The arena fell silent. The announcer nearly sprinted over, excitement spilling from his voice. "Mr. Statham has a question for our performer." The crowd inside the big arena suddenly went quiet. All the noise, all the cheering, all the clapping stopped in an instant. Everyone's eyes turned toward one man. Something important was about to happen, and nobody wanted to miss a single second of it. The announcer, who had been talking excitedly all evening, noticed it too. He grabbed a microphone and hurried across the stage, his face shining with energy. "Ladies and gentlemen," he shouted with excitement, "Mr. Statham has a question for our demonstrator." The crowd gasped and leaned forward. Jason Statham himself wanted to ask something. Statham accepted the microphone with a calm smile and gave a polite nod of thanks. His voice was steady and respectful. "That was an impressive demonstration," he said, his tone warm, not mocking at all. "I've always admired the beauty and smoothness of Aikido. But I wonder, would you be willing to show that same move on someone who hasn't practiced how to fall properly?" The words were polite. The question was honest. But the meaning behind the question made the crowd whisper among themselves. They knew exactly what he was asking. When martial artists practice together, they usually agree to help each other. The one who is being thrown, called the uke, knows how to fall safely without getting hurt. But what if the person didn't know how to fall in the Aikido way? Would the throw still work, or would it fail? Steven Seagal, the tall man in black who had been giving the demonstration, stood perfectly still at the center of the mat. His face gave away nothing. Seconds stretched into silence, and the air grew heavier and heavier. Finally, Seagal spoke. His deep voice rolled across the mat. "Aikido techniques," he explained, "require proper yukami. That is the art of receiving the move and falling safely. Without that, it would be unsafe. Someone could get hurt. It would be irresponsible to demonstrate otherwise." The crowd nodded. It made sense. Falling wrong could hurt your arm, your head, or even your back. Statham, however, tilted his head thoughtfully. His voice stayed calm. "That's a fair point about safety," he agreed. "But I wasn't asking about a total beginner. I meant someone trained in another martial art, who knows how to move, but hasn't specifically practiced being thrown in Aikido." The people in the arena murmured louder. They felt it. This was not just curiosity anymore. This was a challenge, wrapped up in polite words. Statham was asking, would the move still work if the person didn't play along? Seagal adjusted his glasses slowly. "The principles are the same, no matter the background of the partner," he replied carefully. But there are always expectations about movement that is necessary for safe practice. I understand, Statham said, still polite. So the techniques do need some cooperation from the one being thrown. That single sentence cut right to the heart of the debate many martial artists had whispered about for years. Was Aikido real self-defense? Or was it more like a performance where the partner allowed themselves to be thrown? In the stands, Daniel, a young fighter who had looked up to these men since childhood, leaned forward. He could see the tension on Seagal's face. For the first time that night, his calm mask was cracking. Not cooperation, Seagal snapped quickly, his voice sharper now. Understanding of Yukami. I see, Statham said softly. His voice was calm, his eyes gentle. Then, would you be willing to demonstrate the move on me? I promise to be safe. I haven't trained in Aikido falls, but I will not endanger myself. The challenge was spoken, respectful, polite, but it was still a challenge, clear as day. The crowd gasped as one. Then the whispers turned to shouts. Do it! Do it! Voices called, spreading louder and louder, until the whole arena was chanting in unison. Seagal froze. His body didn't move, but his mind was racing. If he refused, everyone would think he was afraid. If he agreed, and it failed, he might embarrass himself in front of thousands of people. The announcer, sensing danger, tried to save the moment. Perhaps we should finish the demonstration as planned. I accept. Seagal interrupted sharply, his voice tight. A simple wrist technique. Nothing elaborate. The crowd erupted in cheers. This was the moment they had hoped for. Statham, calm as ever, handed the microphone back and walked onto the mat. He moved with easy grace, like someone completely comfortable in his own skin. He stopped a short, respectful distance from Seagal. What would you like me to do? Statham asked, his voice calm. Seagal raised his hand. Grab my right wrist with both hands. Hold tight. Apply pressure. Resist the move. Statham nodded and stepped into place. He grabbed Seagal's wrist firmly with both hands. His stance was solid, balanced like a rock. His feet planted strong and steady. The arena grew completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. Daniel felt his heart pound. He knew this was not just a show anymore. This was the real test. Image versus reality. Claim versus truth. Seagal began the move. He twisted his body, guiding the wrist in a sharp circular motion, the very same move that had sent his assistant flying just minutes ago. His form was perfect. His technique looked sharp. But Statham didn't fly. He didn't fall. He shifted slightly, adjusting his feet, and stayed upright. His grip never loosened. Seagal's expression grew tighter. He tried again, with more force. Statham went slightly but stood firm. Seagal tried small variations. A twist here, a step there, a sharper turn. But every attempt ended the same. Statham remained on his feet, solid, balanced, refusing to fall like the assistants before him. Seconds stretched into what felt like forever. The silence grew heavy, pressing down on everyone in the arena. At last, Statham released Seagal's wrist gently and stepped back. His voice was quiet, almost private. Thank you for the demonstration, he said, just loud enough for Seagal and a few close by to hear. There's value in all martial arts traditions. The words weren't meant to hurt. They were meant to give dignity, even in failure. But the meaning was clear. The throw had failed. Seagal stood frozen. He couldn't hide the truth anymore. The crowd's silence felt sharper than any boo or jeer. The announcer rushed forward, desperate to save the show. Ladies and gentlemen, a wonderful exchange between two legends. Let's thank them both for sharing their wisdom tonight. The applause was weak, scattered, unsure. Statham bowed respectfully to Seagal, then walked calmly back to his seat, his face thoughtful, not proud. Seagal did not bow. He stood stiff, rigid, then turned and walked straight off the mat. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't wave. He didn't bow. He walked directly to the arena exit, his assistant hurrying to keep up. The audience sat in stunned silence as Steven Seagal, the famous movie star and self-proclaimed master, left with his back straight and his pride shattered. In the stands, Elena's fingers flew across her keyboard as she typed. "This is going to be impossible to spin," she whispered. Daniel, still staring at the exit, nodded slowly. "It's not about the move failing," he said softly. "It's about how he handled the failure." Across the arena, Jason Statham sat back down. His expression wasn't one of triumph. It was calm, thoughtful. When a small boy came up shyly asking for an autograph, Statham smiled warmly, asked the boy about his own training, and took his time. The contrast couldn't have been greater. One man had built his image on being undefeatable and collapsed when that illusion broke. The other had built his life on constant learning and stayed unshaken, graceful even in the middle of a challenge. When the night's program ended, Daniel walked out deep in thought. He had seen more than a demonstration. He had seen the real heart of martial arts, not in who could throw whom, but in how one carried themselves when things didn't go as planned. The next morning, dawn broke over Las Vegas. Golden light painted the city. While most people still slept after long nights of fun, Daniel jogged quietly through a park near his hotel. His mind replayed every moment from the night before. His phone buzzed. Elena had already published her article. The headline read, "Legends Collide When Hollywood Martial Arts Met Reality." Daniel slowed to a walk, reading the story. Elena had captured every detail. Seagal's refusal, Statham's polite challenge, the failed demonstration, the walkout. But at the end, she added something unexpected. She wrote about a moment backstage, away from the cameras. She had asked Seagal, "What matters more, looking perfect or learning from failure?" Seagal had paused, then answered with surprising honesty. "Learning from failure," he admitted, "though it took me too long to realize it." For the first time, Seagal had shown real strength, not in throwing someone, but in admitting a hard truth. Daniel smiled. Elena had seen not just the spectacle, but the humanity. His phone buzzed again. Video clips had gone viral overnight. Millions had watched. People argued in comment sections about Aikido's effectiveness, Seagal's pride, Statham's grace. But the most shared clip wasn't the failed throw. It was the moment afterward, when Statham bowed and said, "There's value in all martial arts traditions." That single act of respect, in the middle of another man's failure, touched people all over the world. Daniel pocketed his phone and stopped at a small outdoor cafe. As he sat with his coffee, he noticed a man jogging toward him. It was Jason Statham himself, wearing simple running clothes. Statham spotted him and gave a friendly nod. "Mind if I join you?" "Please," Daniel said quickly, surprised. They sat together, sipping coffee, watching joggers and dog walkers pass by. "You're Daniel Reyes," Statham said after a pause. "I've seen some of your fights. Good technique. Solid basics." Daniel blushed. "Thank you. That means a lot." "You were there last night," Statham continued. "Yes," Daniel nodded. "I grew up watching both you and Seagal. Last night it taught me something. Not in the way most expected, I suppose." Statham smiled gently. "No," Daniel admitted, "but maybe in the way I needed." Statham nodded, taking another sip. "When I first started, I lost many times. My very first tournament, I was knocked out in the first round. It was humiliating." Daniel's eyes widened. "I didn't know that." "Most people don't," Statham said with a shrug. "People remember the championships, not the failures that built the champion." He stared out at the rising sun. The problem with pretending to be unbeatable is this: one small crack, and the whole wall comes crashing down. "Like Seagal," Daniel said softly. "Yes," Statham agreed. "He lived as if he could never be beaten. And eventually, he started believing it himself. That's a heavy weight to carry." "Do you think he'll recover?" Daniel asked. Statham considered. His public image? Maybe not fully. But as a martial artist, as a man, that's his choice. The biggest chances for growth often come wrapped inside public failures. Daniel thought about his own career. "I always thought a true master never loses." Statham shook his head. "Being a master isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise afterward. And sometimes, it's about helping others rise, even if they just challenged you." The sun climbed higher as they talked. Daniel found himself asking questions not about kicks or punches, but about humility, defeat, and legacy. The martial arts world is changing, Statham said. MMA has shown what works under pressure. Traditional arts still matter, but they must adapt or they'll turn into performance, not practice. Is that what happened to Aikido? Daniel asked. Statham thought carefully. Aikido has beautiful ideas. The problem isn't the art. It's when people stop testing it against real resistance. If a move only works when the partner cooperates, that isn't self-defense. That's choreography. Daniel nodded. He remembered last night, when the assistants flew but Statham stood his ground. So where's the balance? He asked. That's a question every martial artist must answer for themselves, Statham said. For me, it's honoring tradition while being honest about what works. He glanced at his watch. I have an interview soon. Daniel hesitated. One last question burned inside him. Last night, when you bowed to Seagal after the move failed, that wasn't just for show, was it? Statham's expression turned serious. Respect isn't conditional on victory, Daniel. It's about honoring the journey, even when someone takes a wrong turn. He stood and extended his hand. Your generation has the chance to bring balance back, skill and honor together. Don't waste it. Daniel shook his hand firmly. I won't. Thank you. As Statham jogged away, Daniel called out, Did you know the move wouldn't work on you? Statham paused and turned. I knew Aikido works differently than how it's often shown, he said finally. But last night wasn't about moves. It was about the truth. With a final nod, he jogged off, leaving Daniel with more to think about than ever before. Across town in Las Vegas, inside a tall, shiny hotel called the Bellagio, Steven Seagal sat all alone. He was not smiling. He was not talking. He was just sitting very still in a very big, very fancy room called a luxury suite. In front of him was a giant flat-screen TV. The screen was bright, but the sound was turned off. The TV was playing clips from the night before. The room was so quiet that the only noise was the little buzzing sound from his cell phone, lying face down on the coffee table. It buzzed and buzzed, over and over, because his manager and his publicist kept calling him. But Steven did not touch it. He didn't want to hear them right now. The TV showed him walking out of the fighting arena. Then it showed replays of the fight in slow motion. Everyone could see the moment when Steven tried a special Aikido move, but the move failed. The headlines under the video were cruel. Seagal's skills exposed. Aikido master fails real test. Statham beat Seagal in VGA showdown. Steven stared at those words for a long time. He thought about turning the TV off, but instead, his finger pressed rewind. He went back to one part of the fight that kept bothering him. It was not the part where Steven's move failed. It was the part where Jason Statham, his opponent, won. After winning, Jason bowed down respectfully. He didn't brag. He didn't laugh. He didn't act like he was the strongest man alive. He simply bowed, showing respect and kindness. That moment haunted Steven all night. He could not sleep. He realized something strange. Jason didn't just win with his punches or his kicks. He won because of his heart, his spirit, and his calmness. Jason showed strength without bragging about it. Steven, on the other hand, had always shown off his power. Suddenly, knock, knock. Someone was knocking at the door. Steven ignored it. Knock, knock. Again. Then a young man's voice called. Mr. Seagal, it's Daniel Reyes. May I speak with you before I leave? Steven stayed silent. He thought, do I want to open the door? Do I want to talk? Or should I stay alone? After a long pause, Steven stood up, walked slowly to the door, and opened it just a little. A young fighter stood outside. His eyes looked serious, but also respectful. What do you want? Steven asked in a flat, careful voice. Just 5 minutes, Daniel said. I'm not here as a fan or a reporter. I'm here as a student. Something in Daniel's tone felt honest. It wasn't begging. It wasn't fake. Steven thought about it, then stepped aside and let him in. The room was dim. The heavy curtains were shut, blocking the bright morning sun. The air felt heavy and tired. Daniel's eyes went to the TV, which still showed the fight. Then he looked back at Steven. He noticed the dark circles under Steven's eyes and how his shoulders slumped. Usually Steven stood tall like a statue, but now he looked tired and small. "I've been watching myself for hours," Stephen said, pointing to the screen. "Not exactly the most flattering replay." "No," Daniel agreed gently. Stephen walked to the bar, poured water into 2 glasses, and gave one to Daniel. "You didn't come here to give me pity," Stephen said. "So why are you here?" Daniel held the glass in his hands. He took a deep breath. "I came," Daniel said, "because of what you said backstage. You said learning is more important than looking unbeatable. That felt real to me. More real than anything else I saw last night." Stephen's face didn't move much, but something in his eyes changed. "When I was 14, Daniel continued, I watched your movies. I thought mastery meant never losing, never showing weakness, always having the perfect move. I wanted to be like that." He paused. His voice grew stronger. "But last night showed me something different." "That I'm a fraud?" Stephen asked sharply, his voice cutting. "No," Daniel answered without hesitation. "It showed me that mastery isn't about never failing. It's about what you do when you fail." The words filled the air. Stephen turned away, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain open a crack. He stared at the shining Las Vegas skyline. 40 years, he whispered. 40 years building a reputation, an image, and all it takes is one night, one moment, to make people question everything. "Only if your foundation was the image instead of the practice," Daniel replied softly. Stephen turned back and studied him. "When did you get so wise?" "About 12 hours ago," Daniel said, with a small smile. "Watching 2 different styles of martial arts collide makes you think." To his own surprise, Stephen let out a laugh. A short, real laugh. "Fair enough." He motioned for Daniel to sit down. Stephen sat across from him. "So what now?" "The mighty Seagal falls, and the internet laughs." "Maybe for a while," Daniel admitted. "But what happens next is up to you." "Retirement sounds tempting," Stephen said. "Or reinvention," Daniel countered. "Not as the unbeatable master, but as someone with 4 decades of knowledge. Someone who can share wisdom, even the wisdom that comes from failing in public." Stephen thought for a long time. Finally, he said, "Do you know what hurt most last night? Not the failed move. Not even the humiliation. It was Statham showing me respect I hadn't earned. That cut deeper than any punch." Daniel nodded. "Because it forced you to see the gap between your image and your reality." "Exactly," Stephen said. He leaned back in his chair. He looked tired, but also more real than he had in years. "Aikido has good principles, but I stopped testing them. I just believed they worked because people told me they did." "Then test them now," Daniel said. "Not to prove anything to others, but to reconnect with why you started martial arts in the first place." Stephen studied him closely. "You're not what I expected, Mr. Reyes." "And neither are you," Daniel replied honestly. "And that's a good thing." Daniel stood to leave. Stephen stayed seated, thinking, "What will you take from all this?" Stephen asked, "For your own career?" Daniel paused, then said, "That techniques matter less than the character behind them. True strength isn't about never falling. It's about rising again." Stephen nodded slowly. Not a bad lesson for one chaotic night. He reached out his hand. "Good luck with your fighting career." Daniel shook it firmly. "Good luck with whatever comes next." Half a year later, a small martial arts school outside Las Vegas held an unusual seminar. The flyer was plain. No flashy words. Just reality-based Aikido, principles and limitations, with Steven Seagal. Only about 50 people came. They weren't dazzled fans. They were curious students. In the back row, Daniel Reyes sat quietly watching. Stephen looked different now. He no longer wore dark sunglasses. He no longer dressed in a big fancy hakama. He wore a simple black GI. His long ponytail was gone. His hair was shorter, streaked with silver. But the biggest change was his face. His eyes looked open. His voice sounded honest. "Aikido," Stephen told the group, "has beautiful principles about harmony and flow. But over the years, people have exaggerated its power." Students whispered to each other at this surprising honesty. "Today," Stephen continued, We'll explore what works, what doesn't, and most importantly, why. For 3 hours, Stephen taught. He showed moves with partners who helped and partners who resisted. When something didn't work, he didn't lie. He admitted it and explained why. When students asked hard questions, he answered truthfully. This wrist lock, Stephen said once, works well if someone grabs you with a strong grip and doesn't know the counter. But against a trained fighter, it's much less reliable. That doesn't make it useless. It just makes it situational. Students nodded. Some smiled. They respected this honesty. After the seminar ended, Daniel walked to the mat. Stephen looked up, recognition in his eyes. Mr. Reyes, Stephen said warmly. I thought you might come. Wouldn't have missed it, Daniel said, shaking his hand. They moved to a quiet corner. So, Stephen asked, wiping sweat. What do you think? Be honest. Daniel smiled. Honestly, maybe the most truthful martial arts seminar I've ever seen. Stephen nodded. It's been an interesting 6 months. My agent quit. 2 movie deals disappeared. Half of my students left. He shrugged. But the ones who stayed? They're here for the right reasons. And so am I. No regrets about that night? Daniel asked. About the fight itself, yes, Stephen admitted. But about what came after? None. He gestured around the dojo. This is smaller than Bright Arenas. It doesn't sell tickets, but it's real. As they walked outside, Stephen said, Statham called me. About 3 months ago. Daniel raised his eyebrows. Really? What did he say? He invited me to guest teach at his ranch. Said his students could benefit from learning Aikido's balance and redirection. Stephen shook his head. After everything, he still saw value in me. The sun was setting. The Las Vegas mountains glowed red and gold. The funny thing, Stephen said, standing by his car, is I spent decades trying to prove I was superior. All it gave me was loneliness. Statham spent his career sharing what he knew, admitting his limits, and building friendships. Guess which one built a true legacy? Daniel nodded. Are you going to accept his invitation? Already did, Stephen said. I'll teach there next month. He opened his car door, then paused. Do you know what Statham told me on the phone? He said, the martial arts world needs all its traditions, Stephen, even the ones that need updating. Jason led. The man I thought was just a movie cowboy is actually one of the wisest martial artists I've ever met. He drove away. Daniel stood there, thinking about the amazing change that started with one public failure. The man who had once built his image on invincibility had found something more precious, honesty and realness. Daniel's phone buzzed. A message from Elena popped up. Working on a follow-up story. Redemption. Seagal's journey from image to substance. Want a comment? Daniel typed back. Some fights aren't won with moves. The most important battles are inside ourselves. Sometimes losing in public is the only way to win in private. He pocketed his phone and walked to his car. He thought about his next fight. Win or lose. He knew it wouldn't define him. What mattered was how he carried himself. In the end, the strongest technique wasn't a punch or a throw. It was the bravery to face yourself honestly. No costume, no movie, no sunglasses could hide that truth.